All right. So we seriously are going to do a couple different things today. Um, we'll start. A lot of times at New Year's time, which this is New Year's Day. Happy New Year's, everybody. Um, a lot of times, what we do is we look forward and we say, here's my goals, here's my resolutions, here's my new beginnings, and we all start to turn that way, which is really cool and the right thing to do on January 1. However, I thought we'd break it up a little bit today, and instead of looking forward to our 2023, it's actually, we're going to talk, I'm going to just share a little bit this morning about how it's good sometimes to look back over the past year and say, God, what did you do in my life? What is it that you want to adjust? And learn from our past year. And sometimes we just get so zooming straight ahead that we forget to look back and say, what can I carry with me into the next year? So I'm going to just share a little bit this morning, and then we'll have some sharing time by you. If you noticed, Jason's announcement online was encouraging you guys to be prepared for that. And then we want to end with a time of worship at the end of our service and some communion time with that at that point. So that's kind of how we'll lay it out this morning. I just want to, before we share, I just want to share several things, and let me get my act together here. One of which is looking back, like I said. What can I take with me that I've learned from this past year into the new year, 2023, is what I'm asking you to think about. What is it that we can take forward from here? What are the blessings, the miracles that we encountered? What do we hear God saying after walking through 2022? Let's not walk through 2020 again. What did we hear God saying? What healing did we experience from our brokenness? Where did we see God working, and how did we join him in it? You ladies are going through a Sunday school class that talks about that. Where did we see God working, and how can we join him in it? What part of 2022, of the 2022 tapestry, seemed like a woven mess early in the year, but now in hindsight, you are beginning to see the beauty of the whole rug? What are we thankful for now that you didn't think you would be thankful for at the beginning of the year, or maybe midway through the year? So those are the questions that I just want us to start to look back and say, what is it, God, that we can take away, that we can move forward with and learn from? Actually, at the end of 2018, I have a little notebook that I keep all my little things that I share, and I was hosting on December 30th of 2018. And one of the things that I shared about on that Sunday was actually about the knots in a piece of wood like this. I couldn't find the one that I actually used then. It was better than this. But you see the knots in the wood? A lot of times when we look back at the past year, we see the knots kind of represent the tough times and the difficult times. And a lot of times when we see the knots in our lives, we think, oh, those are ugly. They're speckled, and they make it look weird, But what I want to encourage us is, as you think back, and I'd encourage you to be thinking back over the 2022, every knot that you see is actually in actual trees. It's actually where growth happened, isn't it? It's where a limb was started, or it's where a scar, occurred, and you can see that. It's a place, and actually, if you cut firewood like I did for many years, the place where a limb starts is one of the strongest, most dense places in a tree, right? If you have ever tried to split where a limb takes off. And what I shared was, and what I want us to think about is, as you think about, and you look back over your year, some of the, there's some of you might think, oh, there's a lot of knots that I don't want to look at. But the knots, I know what I was going to share. The knots, like one time we went to Pokagon State Park, and they had this cabin that was knotty pine. And when you look at just the knots, it's like, it just looks yucky just looking at the knot. But when you look at all of the boards put together, one after another, and you walk in, it's rustic and it looks great, And a lot of times it's the knots that make the beauty, the mosaic of life. And so as we move forward here, and we're just take some time to share, know that, think about those knots as well in your life, because those are sometimes the things that create the most beauty in the big picture. The story that I want to talk about a little bit for a few minutes is that goes with looking back and remembering is the story out of Joshua 3 and 4. Joshua 3 and 4 is a story about when the children of Israel came, they came to the promised land. They sent in some spies, and 2 of the spies came back and said, hey, this land's really good. And then Joshua decided now is the time to move forward into the promised land. And so what they ran into, they got up, started to go, they ran into the Jordan River. And the Jordan River was their first obstacle of trying to get into the promised land. And you ever find that it seems like, thinking back over this year, sometimes there's obstacles that you feel like that are keeping you from getting into the promised land? And it's almost like this story is like, if you look at it like that, it's like it is a good reminder of, okay, here's the obstacle. Now what are we going to do? And what they did was, what the children of Israel did was basically God told them to take the Ark of the Covenant and let the priests put their feet down in the water, and as soon as the priest's feet hit the water stopped on one side, and they were able to walk on through. And the Ark of the Covenant, those guys that carried the Ark of the Covenant were supposed to stay right in the center of the Jordan, and as long as they were in the center of the Jordan, standing there in the middle of their struggle, the water stayed back, and the people were able to go right on through. But what I want to bring to your attention more than anything is what God commanded them to do after the struggle. After they walked through, that was their struggle. God said this to them in Joshua 4, verse 3. He says, and the Lord commanded them, saying, take up for yourselves 12 stones from here, out of the middle of the Jordan, from the place where the priest's feet were standing firm, and carry them over with you, and lay them down in the lodging place where you will lodge tonight." So Joshua called 12 men whom he had appointed from the sons of Israel, one man from each tribe. And Joshua said to them, "Cross again to the ark of the Lord your God in the middle of the Jordan, and each one of you get a stone on his shoulder according to the number of tribes of Israel. And let this be a sign to you, so that when your children ask you later, 'What do these stones mean to me?' And then basically it says, and then you shall tell them, well, this is when God delivered us and he allowed us to walk across the Jordan." And it says at the end of this in verse 7, it says, "So these stones shall be a memorial to the sons of Israel forever." And so they walked through, and then Joshua says, you know what? It's not good enough just to walk through your struggle, but look back and go back to the place where the struggle occurred. Grab those stones and bring them over here where we're spending the night. And that's kind of what we're asking us to do this morning, is to grab the stones, go back to the very epicenter of maybe what your year was like. Maybe it was a good year. Maybe you had lots of blessings. Go back to those. Grab that stone and carry it forward and put it over here on the edge so that we can say, you know what? We've been through this whole year, and this is what I'm hanging on to. This is the stone that I'm hanging on to that the Lord wants me to remember from this past year. So, that might be, again, it could be maybe you had a new baby and that's a blessing. Maybe what was the present? Maybe you got what was the name of that shirt that he had? A Woody shirt. Yeah, from Toy Story. A Woody shirt, But I just would like us to take some time this morning before we do our worship and before our communion time and look back over this past year and say, what are those things that God's asking me to remember? Where's that point that I need to carry? What is that point that I need to carry forward? Yeah. And a lot of times, that can be a lot of different things for each of you. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to open it up here, and I've actually asked like 3 people to kind of start us off a little bit. But I want you to know that this morning as we share together where God has taken us through this past year, it doesn't have to be long. We don't necessarily want it to be long. But if there's something that you were blessed with over this past year, feel free to share it, okay? And what we'd like to do is we've got a crate of stones up here, and as you share, just come up after you share, and let's start a little altar, just like they did with the at the Jordan River, and just place your stone on that plate and say, this is the stone that I want to remember. So I think what I'll do, I'm trying to think, is there anything else, hon, that I need to remember? Okay. Absolutely. I knew that was something I needed to remember. So, anyway. So, is that clear? Is everybody good with that? I'd just like to take a few minutes and let's do that.
So I get to go first. This year has been really good and also really challenging. Back in 2020, we had decided to start foster care classes. It's something that we'd always kind of talked about, but never really fully went for. And then 2020, we were at home, and I was praying. I asked God, honestly, for it to be Jeff's, for him to bring it up, because I didn't want to push him into something that he wasn't ready for or didn't want to do. And when we were at home, he's like, let's just do it. All the classes are online, let's do it. I said, okay, let's do it. Anyway, so that was, 2020, and we started right away. And for some reason, like, we never, we weren't getting calls. But you always hear, like, we need foster parents, but we weren't getting any calls. And so I remember, we had prayed from the beginning, like, okay, God, if you want us to do this, we want to do this. I don't want to do this just because it's a good thing. I want to do it because you want us to do it. I want the kids that you want in our home. I want your kids. That's what I want. Anyway, so I guess my biggest thing, and I probably should have started out with this, was if you want to see God in your life in this next year, you'll include him. If you never include God, you won't ever see him, or it'll be hard. And so from the very beginning, when we even had kids, before we had Jesse, we had asked God. We didn't get pregnant right away, and I honestly, we had been praying, and we felt like God gave us this name for our baby. And so then when we did get pregnant with Jesse, I remember like it was just set, like, that's his name. This is going to be his name, which was not Jesse, if that's confusing or not. It was a different name. And like a month before we had him, like, then Jeff kind of brought up Jesse, and I was like, yeah, okay, but remember God said, like, this name, this is the name. Remember? And he's like, yeah, you're right. And names have always been a really big deal for us because the meaning and everything, like, it just was always a really big deal. And so, like, he'd bring up Jesse again, and I'd be like, yeah, but remember what this name means? And we really felt like God gave us this name. Anyway, so then we had Jesse, and Jeff was just set, like, it's Jesse. And I was like, oh, okay, well, maybe if we have another baby. And so then we had Anna, and of course she was a girl, so this name did not work. And then, later we had Ellie, and I was sure. And then when she was a girl, I was like, okay, well, let's try the girl version of that name, because remember this name. This is important. Like, I felt like God gave us this name. And anyway, like the last month I was pregnant with her, I just kept hearing the name Ellie over and over and over again. I was like, God, for real, I don't know if we're having more children. Like, I don't know if we can. Like, this is the name. I felt like you gave us this name. Anyway, so we named her Ellie, and then 2020, we started the foster care thing. And again, we went into it very cautiously. Like, I want to do this, but again, I want to do it because you want us to do it, not because whatever. And so we just laid it out there. We said, okay, God, if you don't want us to do this, don't bring us any kids. And if you want us to do this, bring us this name. And amazingly enough, like, we found out later, like, they don't actually call you and say, hey, we need you to come get so-and-so. They don't give the names. And so I was like, oh, okay, we'll never know until they're right here at our door. But our caseworker at the time slipped and accidentally said our little boy that we have right now, his name, and it was the name. And that's the very first phone call we ever got. And so it was just that confirmation of, like, okay, maybe these kids won't always be in our family, but they were supposed to be in our family right now. And because we included God from the beginning, we always have that. And there has been such great times with these kids. I mean, such great times. I don't know if many of you have met our little boy, but he is just the most lovable little thing in the world. Like, the very first day, he came to my house, and again, he was only 2 at the time, and so I'm like, I'm probably going to be up all night with this kid. Like, there's no way I won't be. And he literally, I just laid him down, and he was like, bye, Mom, good night. And I was like, okay, good night. And then I was like, well, surely he's not going to sleep through the night. And then it came to be like 8:30 in the morning. I was like, I got to go check on this. I got to go check on him. I opened the door. He's like, Mom, you're back. And so, there has been such good times, but especially this last month, there's been some really tough times. I mean, raising kids in general is hard. And then you add some other trauma in there, and it is hard. So this last month has been really, really hard. But again, I can always fall back on that no, God brought me these kids. I didn't go out and get them. God brought me, and these aren't my kids. They're God's kids that he had planned before Jesse was born, because that name was important to God too, and that's why God gave us that name. Just some other really cute things that happened too, right before, a week before we got a phone call. Again, we hadn't gotten called for 2 years, which is just crazy. And Ellie was like, Mom, I really, really, really want another sister my age. And I was like, well, that's not how it works. You can't just call and get that. And then Jesse was just he likes to tease her anyway, but Jesse was just like, well, I'd rather have a brother actually. And Ellie's like, hey, Mom, tell God we'll take 2. And I'm like, okay. So with that, I'm going to do, so our stone is that God brought us 2 more of his kids for us to love and raise for however long we have them. But I will never forget how God came into our lives and dropped these 2 beautiful kids, even on the hard days. It's hard, but he is. Oh, and the other thing, we only had them for about a month, and they both asked Jesus in their heart, just with 1 month of being in our house. So these are God's kids.
Thanks, Andrea.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to be really special and use this because I have a whole novel, so I had to write everything out. I just wanted to come up and share today. I know, I was just baptized in October at the Day at the Gardens, which was amazing, and I shared some of the story then, and it still holds true. But then in the 2 months since, or 3 months since, I feel like everything has changed and everything is kind of just flipped upside down since then. So first of all, I want to say, Andrea, what you said makes perfect sense. Including God in your plans will let you see that he's there. Because that's what I was going to come up and say, actually, is the year that I've allowed God to show me what's happening is the year that I've been okay with what's happening. And we were able to include him this year, and we were able to live out that faith and live through it and just see him there. But that was obviously not even what I wrote, so sorry about that. It just really worked with it. So in 2022, just for a quick recap, Mike and I joined the church a little over a year ago. He was baptized very quickly. He was like, this is where my heart is, this is where we're going to be, and this is our life. And I was kind of like, okay, we'll be there, cool. It was a little harder for me to take in. It was a little more challenging for me to accept things and to, I guess, accept that someone else is not in charge of my life, but guiding my life. And that didn't work for me because I was in charge of my life. I was choosing what I was doing, and I was living my life. I was wrong. And when I was baptized, I said something kind of in a joking manner that I feel like I had to rethink and revisit. As I said, it seemed like Mike was kind of dragging me along. I feel like that makes it seem like I was resistant, which I was not. I feel like the more accurate way is he was leading me. God had worked in his heart first, knowing that I would need a little help. So Mike had his heart given over, and he knew where we needed to be as a family, even though I didn't yet. So I was able to just lead and follow his lead and trust that he was taking us in the right direction. And not so much as I didn't want to be here, but I'm just doing it because my husband is. That was not the case. So to look at it that way is, I feel like, more positive, because not only was I following and letting Mike lead me, but that also gave me the tools to be able, like, to say, okay, God, lead me. Like, I might struggle a bit, it might be a challenge, but lead me, it's okay. And so that's kind of where I guess the whole theme of the year is. And of course, throughout our year at Cornerstone, I mean, to say that this has become another family to me is an understatement, and I think a lot of you know that. Everyone here that I've come in contact with has seen me in ways that I haven't felt seen before. You've blessed me in ways that I've never been blessed before. My family, not just me. I mean, Mike and the boys. I mean, Amber and I have joked that, and Amy, I think, all of us have joked about how quickly all of the kids were just like, and we're best friends. And it was like day one. And it just gave me a sense of peace that I'd never had. So being here and then coming on staff here at Cornerstone has been phenomenal. I mean, I feel like it's really given me a chance to recognize that I have the ability to lead, but I also have the ability to follow. And that's okay when the time is needed for that. So that's something that has just been really helpful. And then to just touch on the little nuances of life, I had a full-time job also when I started working here at Cornerstone. So I was working full-time from home. I was working part-time here. We have a farm. We have kids. They have stuff, life. And working here made me realize how much I really didn't like my job. Like it was almost painful to go. But we have bills. We have responsibilities. We have to have income. So I was there. And I was working both jobs for, I don't know, quite some time. I think about 9 months. And even through Bible study over the summer, I had some friends kind of help me realize, like, it's okay to admit that you don't want to be there as long as I'm doing what I need to be doing. And just accept that when it's time for that to be done, it'll be done. And I knew that I would never pull that trigger. Well, come November, right before Christmas, they said, sorry, bye, we're eliminating your position. So that was really hard for me, but after my initial reaction, I realized I didn't want to be there anyways, so why am I going to be upset? And God made that decision for me. I truly believe that. He made the decision that said, you're done now. And either something else will come along, or we're looking at changes we can make with our farm and make it more like a business and more profitable to be able to have that income so I can actually just stay and work with the farm. So, I mean, I know that's something silly, but that was something that was weighing extremely heavy on my heart. And I want to give props to Doris also. I can't forget Doris. We talk weekly, and she came to me in August-ish, and she said, I was praying for you and I had words. I said, okay, be patient and wait. And I was like, I don't know what that means. And she said, I don't know either. I just am supposed to tell you. So I wrote it and put it up on my desk here in the office. I wrote it and I put it on my desk at home. I even have it on my notebook just so that I can remember to be patient and wait and remember that the time will come when it's time. And I did, and I waited. I still don't feel like everything's where it needs to be quite yet, but it's been a year where I learned to follow his lead. I learned to follow Mike's lead because sometimes he has good ideas. And I learned to follow God's lead because he's in my life and he's in my heart, and I've been able to look back and see where he was when I wasn't including him in the plans and realizing he was there. He'll always be there, but until you include him and until you recognize him and until you're living in that faith, then it's just something that just can't happen. And so for myself, for 2022, I just, like I said, I learned to be led or to follow or however you want to call that, and to be open to receiving information when God is ready for me to have it, not when I want to have it. So it's pretty much my 2022 in a nutshell.
Thanks, Jackie. Yeah. You know, it's cool how God can use different situations, like where she's at, where her family's at, and bless other people. We are blessed that you and Mike are around, for sure. All right. And the last person I've asked is Lisa. Oh, my goodness.
So I'm just up here to introduce Elijah John to everybody. Finally got his shots and could come. But as most of you know, I sweat bullets and will soak through this vest in a heartbeat if I sit up here and talk. So I'm going to pass it off to Lisa.
So my testimony revolves around this little man, of course, and Dan has a pretty cool testimony revolving around our son, too. So if you ever have a chance to talk to him in private when he's not in front of an audience, he does wear deodorant. It's not too stinky. You can talk to him. He'll be all right.
When I gave my fireside, I sweat then, too, and there was only 4 people there. So.
Yeah. And I'm going to read right off of this because I have it all written down. I don't have it memorized, but when I was asked to consider sharing my testimony and reflect on this past year, I felt both excitement and hesitation. Excitement because I knew without a doubt that God had been working on my heart and my mind, but hesitation because, to be honest, I'm still figuring it all out. I would have much preferred in my mind, in my human mind, to wait to share this with you until I had it all beautifully wrapped as a present with a bow on top, and I could say, here you go, here's my testimony. But the irony in that is that God is trying to help me let go of control. So when I wanted to wait for a time when I had more control over this to share it with you, I looked up and I said, okay, I see what you're doing here. Let's try this out. So this is outside of my comfort zone. You know, it doesn't feel prepared. It doesn't feel clean and shiny, but that's what God is trying to teach me, is that that's not what it's about. So we're going to dive right in. How did we get here? This is a story about God lovingly and graciously opening my eyes to areas in which I wasn't fully trusting him, things that I was holding on to that I shouldn't be holding on to, and things that were getting in the way of me getting to see truly who he is and how much he loves us. So let's rewind 3 years. I'd love to say that this is just a story of 2022, but I'm too stubborn for this to have been accomplished in just 1 year. So this took 3. In the start of 2020, Dan and I decided that we were excited to start a family. Due to my family history and some of my own medical concerns, I knew infertility was a possibility. Just for some context, it took my parents 6 years to have a child. They were told, you absolutely will not have children. The science failed them over and over again. And it actually took my mom praying, which is something she didn't do at the time, and saying, Lord, if you bless us with a child, we will raise him or her in the faith. And that's when they got pregnant. So this story was told to me ever since I was a little girl. I knew that God could work through infertility. But I very ignorantly thought, I already know God, right? You don't need to work on infertility through me. I've got this. Give us the baby. We'll raise him in the faith. I'll just do what my mom did. Come on, let's go. But wowza, was I wrong? We are always growing, always developing in our faith, and God wanted to teach me that too. So I'm going to kind of fast forward to teaching you what I learned and then tell you how I got there. So up until this point, there was no denying that I was a person who liked control, and I was a person who sought approval of other people, sometimes over God. But I never saw these as a problem. Heck no, I can justify almost anything if you give me something to justify. Like, do we need to go shopping? Yes. Whatever day of the week it is, I can justify why we need to. Do we need to eat more food? Yes. I can always justify it. So when it came to these 2 things, I could justify it no problem. In regards to control, I would just say, I'm so type A. Yes, I'm a go-getter. How can that be a bad thing? Well, what I didn't see is that my desire for control was making my refusal to fully trust God, and I was relying on my own capabilities instead of giving it to him. But I could just justify it, no problem. In regards to my people-pleasing, I would just say, I like to help people. The Bible says love others. Now, these things are not bad in and of themselves, but they were bad in the way that I was using them to get in the way of my relationship with God. So, side note, yeah, putting your worth in others and not the creator is an incredibly anxiety-producing thing because people have different opinions. People's opinions change, and if you put truth in anything other than the Word of God, it's a tough place to be. But keep in mind, I was blind to all of this at the time, but God wasn't. And my husband wasn't, but he would try to kind of tell me about it, and no, too stubborn. He knew, probably not. So now let's also add into the mix that the devil is sneaky. He knew that these areas were forming a barrier between me and God, but again, they were masked to such wonderful things, loving others, being ambitious, things like that. I had convinced myself that this narrative was good, but in reality, it caused pain and division from God. Side note, I'm mind blown how the creator of the entire universe knows these small details of our lives. Like, I had this hidden from myself, but he still saw it, and he was still pursuing, and he still knew. And it was 2020. He was busy. There was a pandemic. There was a lot going on in the world. You know, what was he doing paying attention to my heart? But he was. So how did my stubborn self eventually come around to all this? Well, like we said before, insert infertility. Something that no matter how hard you try, no matter how much you do the right thing, you have zero control. The science failed us, and for 2 years, Dan and I walked a journey of medications and procedures, heartbreak and disappointment. I realized that no self-help book, no coping skill was going to get me through this one. So I decided to turn to a Christian counselor to help me walk this journey. People would say, oh, you're a counselor. You know how to do this, right? Can't you just counsel yourself? No, you can't. You can't be objective in your own life. And it's always helpful to have an outside place to kind of process what you're going through. So it's no surprise that my counselor quickly picked up on my tendency to control and perform. As noted before, instead of surrendering my circumstances to God, I was holding on to my ability to do the right thing. I wanted to pray the right way. I wanted to help people correctly. I wanted to show up and always say the right thing at the right time, hoping that God would see all the ways that I was working hard, and as a result, I'd be rewarded a baby. Well, I could say I'm giving it to God. If anyone asked me, oh, I'm praying over this, I'm giving it to God. But what I was doing was saying, hey, God, it's yours, but you would much prefer for me to hold on to just a little bit, right? That'd be safer, right? And I think he would probably roll his eyes and say, there, young one. He's got to have a sense of humor. So my counselor kept saying things like, it's obvious God is working in your life, don't miss it. And everything God does is for his glory and our good, so how can he be working for your good through infertility? Now, I know her tricks. I'm a counselor. So I so badly wanted her to just give me the answers. Tell me what you're doing. But in reality, she wanted me to figure it out. She was guiding me. She was offering some truth here and there for me to come to the conclusion on my own. It's kind of annoying being on the other side, but I wanted it to work, and I wanted to learn, and I wanted to grow, so I knew it was going to be a blessing. So at this point, she introduced me to a book called The Cure. This book is about someone who's walking down a path, and they come to a fork in the road. One road is called Trust God Fully, and the other road is called The Path of Good Intentions. So of course I thought, I would pick the path to trust God fully. Of course I would. But as I was reading the book, the reality was I've been walking the path of good intentions, which again, is not bad. They're good intentions, but they can get in the way of fully trusting God and letting go of control. So through this book, I discovered that my desire to do good was a refusal, an absolute refusal to hand my circumstances over to God. Deep down, I discovered I was idolizing self-sufficiency, control, and pride. That was a hard thing to swallow. And ultimately, the way I was thinking was pretty insulting to God. I mean, he sacrificed his son so that I don't have to carry that. And day after day, he said, give it to me. And I said, no, remember, I've got this. I didn't want to insult God. That was confusing to me. So this is when I had my aha moment. God was using infertility to lovingly and gently call my bluff. Again, he's so loving. He didn't do it in a mean way. He did it in the comfort of my home, with my loved ones, slowly opening my heart. I remember a moment reading my devotion thinking, holy cow, something cool is happening. But I couldn't put words to it at the time. Infertility was the only thing I couldn't trick myself to have control over, where there was nothing I could do to pass some invisible test and gain God's approval, where the only place I could feel any sort of comfort was to fully surrender and to trust him. To get off the path of good intentions, I had to choose the path of trust. A quote from the book that I was reading states that God allows some pain to awaken our hearts, and wow, am I thankful that my heart was awakened in the way that it was. I needed to let go, not let go, hold on a little and wink, let go and actually give it to him. So I would intentionally do this hand gesture when I felt myself grabbing it back, handing it over to him, because it helped me have a visual. I started to rewrite the narrative and eventually adjust my prayers from, Lord, give me this baby, I'll do it right, to, which is a joke, because there's a lot to learn in motherhood. There's no doing it right. You do the best you can. But I switched it over to help me seek your will, no matter what that is. I started to focus less on what I can do and more on what I can't do in light of needing God's grace and love. I actually started to love where I was falling short because it helped me see him more. Accepting that he is sovereign and that his love is unconditional. Although time continued to pass and I continued to receive negative pregnancy tests, my anxiety was decreasing and I started to feel more at peace than ever before. What a contradiction that is. Yeah, he was a negative pregnancy test at first too. Surprise. Now, I think you know how the story ends. We started this off introducing you to our son, Elijah. God was so incredibly good to not have only blessed us with our son, but he did so in a way that also allowed me to grow spiritually. I mean, he's got it figured out. How cool is that? Now, do I have it all figured out? Absolutely not. Do I surrender control easily? Not really, but it's a work in progress. And now I have a closer relationship with God. I'm more aware of my tendency to seek unhealthy and sinful things like that control and pride and self-sufficiency. And I have learned those areas, although they may appear good on the surface at times, pull me further away from God if the root of it is not trusting him. Now, it's also not lost on me that God was so good to help me realize these things prior to becoming a mama, because I'm quickly learning that motherhood is filled with pressures and decisions and a lot of things that you cannot control at all. And when I feel that anxiety coming in, I'm reminded of this testimony. When I look at Elijah and think about what it might look like to raise him in the faith, I hope that I can use this story of infertility and his birth to help him understand just how loving his Heavenly Father is, just like my mom's story helped me. So our stone is how good God is, letting go of control, trusting him, and hopefully using this story to help other people who are going through infertility and to help Elijah just understand that God is so loving. Oh, Dan's sweating watching me talk, so there's that.
All right. Now, wow, that was super. All three of those were super. But what I'd like to do now, just for 10 to 20, 15 minutes, something like that. Amy, where's Amy at? If you want to grab a mic up here too, and we'll just split up. I would like to hear from you guys on, what is it? It doesn't have to be, that testimony was written out several pages long. But what is it that you feel like you could share that God is asking you to carry into the next year, to look back and say, this is where God's moved. What is it that he's taught you and that you need to move forward on from here on out? So we're opening up to you guys at this point. It can be just short, little. It doesn't need to be anything long. What has God spoken to you? Daniel.
Morning, everybody. Usually I'm stuck behind the counter there. But while it's not the start of this blessing, 2022 has been a rapid and increasing quickening of the blessings that I've been given, where many people have been speaking to me with voices that aren't completely their own. And I've been given many words, and oftentimes they precede the message that we take here this every Sunday. One thing, it's just astounding and amazing. There are things that have been shared to me that I have been commanded not to share. Things have been given to me that I wish to share and will. There are things that I have been given that I choose not to for their precious nature to me. And come this next week, there are some things with me that I've been commanded to share, and you'll get a taste of that next week. But the one thing that got me, the most recent meeting we had before Bible study, I gave this to Cody's group. This is something that has been very troubling to me, where it feels like all these things were being given to me, but not directly to me, as in I was not experiencing the fruits of, diligence. And that's one of the struggles I've had. Yeah, many of you knew I was in the Navy for 8 years. I was a wanderer in those days, and I was not very diligent with prayer and reading, but I've been called back to it. And this here is from Daniel 10, starting verse 2. In those days, I, Daniel, was mourning for 3 full weeks. I didn't eat any rich food, nor meat or wine entered my mouth. I didn't put any oil on my body until all the 3 weeks were over. And on the 24th day of the first month, this is different than our first month, but we'll skip ahead to verse 12. A great, mighty angel appears before Daniel. No one else can see it. They're all scared away, and he falls down, prostrate in awe of this. But the angel picks him up and says, "Do not be afraid, Daniel," he said to me. "For from the first day that you purposed to understand and humble yourself before God, your prayers were heard. I have come because of your prayers. But the prince of the kingdom of Persia opposed me for 21 days. Then Michael, the chief of the princes, came to help me after I had been left there with them." So the stone that I have been carrying is the assurance, and it's been directly spoken to me. God is closer than you think. And so remember that just as with Daniel, we are more so in that way. The first moment you decide that you will pursue something, the reward is prepared and is waiting for you. So do not pursue the duty in search of a feeling, for then your duty will die. But if you pursue your duty because it is good in its own right, later the feelings will come.
Thanks, Nathaniel.
Back in 2020, I got very frustrated with so much hopelessness that was happening, and the verses that say, "To him who was able to do immeasurably more than we could ever ask or imagine, to him be all glory, power, and praise, both now and forevermore." And I began this prayer of impossibility. I said, "Father, I want to preach, I want to teach hope and the Scripture in the school, in Cout School. That's what I want to do, Father. That's what I want to do." And that's not something we can make happen, right? And so it's a prayer of impossibility back in 2020. Well, starting this month, on Tuesdays and Thursdays, the Couts High School students are able to come over here to Cornerstone from 2:05 to 2:35 or whatever it is, and they can hear about Jesus, and they can hear about the Word of God, and they can have hope being given to them. For me, that is an answer to a prayer of impossibility by a God who cares about having people, his children, have hope. And I wasn't a member of this congregation in 2020, but the way that God just orchestrates and moves things and brings things together, my encouragement to each of us in 2023 is exactly the same thing that has been shared several times. Put God at the forefront and what his heart and what his desires are, and let that be your prayer. And it just takes everything off of us. It's not our life anymore. It's not about me. It's about God and what he is doing. And the fulfillment and the peace and the hope and the joy that we have been longing for, that's going to come when we start doing those things that he lays out in front of us for him, for his glory.
Amen. Couple more. Get it while you got a chance. This mic.
I would say as we're waiting, one of the things that my dad always told me growing up, he said, dream so impossible. Think it's so impossible. Make it so impossible that God has to be present in your life to make it possible. So carried it for years, and I still carry when Dad said that to me when I was 13, and I have seen that happen. This is the time for us to make him be possible, you know.
So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Troy Monego, and God put me on this journey that started in 2011. And I went through this thing called the Indiana Dunes Great Banquet, and if you haven't heard about it, it's basically a 3-day course on Christianity. And it really changed how I looked at God and who he was and how important he was in my life. Helped my family. I was not quite living my life the way I should. But within 4 years, I was asked to be the lay director for the men's banquet, which was, to me, extremely surprising, and I was shocked about the whole situation. Moved to 2019, I was asked to be the lay director for the Awakening, which is basically the same thing as the banquet community, except for it's for teenagers from 15 years old, or freshmen in high school to freshmen in college. It took 2.5 years to have that banquet, to have that awakening with COVID and all the other stuff going on at the time. And in the meantime, 2 months after I was asked to be the Awakening lay director, I got asked to be the community lay director for the Awakening. And to watch how God works through people who love him and are willing to put their lives out there and serve is amazing to me. We had the Awakening that I was the lay director for last April. We had 12 kids, I think. And then the one in November, we had 39 kids. And kids are the heart of the Awakening. The kids are the ones that we get to come in and give their testimonies to other kids so they can see who God is through them and what God's done in their lives. And I think you might be surprised at how much these kids understand who God is in ways that I never did until I was about 45 years old. And to see the amount of kids that came through this last banquet and the amount of them that are willing to come back and serve on this next banquet, which is in April, is just, to me, amazing. And it just shows that if we're willing to put ourselves out there and put our trust in God, what he can do through us. So for me, it's just faith, having that trust in what God can do.
Anyone else?
2022, someone just told me this recently, and it kind of made sense to me. This is how my life has kind of came to conclusion this year. Everybody wants to be on the mountaintop, but nothing grows on the mountaintop. So everything grows in the valleys. So God told me this year, just embrace your valleys, and God has a plan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jen. I'm going to go back like 2 years. Many of you may already know. So my father got diagnosed with cancer in 2021. It was a very hard walk for all of our family. But through that entire process, I was able to not only continuously pray, but also kind of incorporate God in many ways that weren't really in my parents' household at that time. So going into 2022, my theme for myself was always, God's got this. And every time something bad happened or something was like just really crummy, and I was like, you know what? It sucks right now, but there's going to be something good at the end. So just keep holding on. You know, it's going to be okay. And that's all I held on to. And I mean, I was pushed through to all the way through December, and I was able to go to school. And, you know, my dad got to see all these things for me. Unfortunately, he didn't get to watch me walk, but the greatest part about it was I got to accomplish something, but I had so much good memories with my dad throughout all of last year that I felt like he was with me on that day that I walked. And I just continuously think, like, you know, it's really hard to not see that person, to not watch you and be there with you, but it was really important to me that I know God's got this. It's in his hands. It was never in my hands. It was never in the doctor's hands. It was always, I have to trust God's process, and I have to trust that he's preparing me for something, you know, in my life in 2023. So I just keep thinking about that, and that was like my biggest theme. So yeah, so now we have new and exciting things in 2023.
Thank you. You want to put a rock in? All right, one more. Lauren.
I won't go into all the details, the time and everything, but the question keeps coming to me is, how's your mission field going? How's my mission field going? Those of you who know me, I work in the schools. I'm a principal at one of the schools in the local area. And the last several years have been super challenging, not unlike many of the situations that you're in. Again, without all the details, been a lot of storm, a lot of craziness going on. Things like that. But I've always felt to pray over my building and my learning community, as I put it, peace. There's a lot of schools you see on the news that it's just craziness going on. There's a lot of kids with trauma. There's a lot of students that need a voice of stability. Quite frankly, there's a lot of parents and a lot of families that need a voice of stability. So I've been really praying over that in the last couple of years. But this past year in particular, there's been a lot of non-peace. We took on a new program in our school building that youngsters filled with trauma, like I've never seen. I've been at it for a while. But I've seen God, and I'm going to speak specifically, we have some staff that's not the vision they have. They went for a different place, and we had a lot of new hires to pull in. And in the midst of that storm, as I reflect back, there was peace in the midst of that storm. And so I've just been really challenged. I don't always do well with it. My wife can tell you, but to embrace contentment and peace in the storms that come. I saw supernatural things happen in the building this past year, where there was peace in the midst of the storm, and peace is coming back to the schools. We're praying over that, and not just because it's laissez-faire and we're just going to be, it's quiet and all those things. No, but because there's a supernatural peace. So in the midst of the storms of life, the midst of storms in situations that go on wherever you work, it's our mission field. Man, it's amazing where God puts each of us. But in my mission field, that's the calling that I feel. And I'm amazed, and I want to embrace peace in the midst of the storm. That.
We're going to... Yes, Lord, that is our prayer. Be magnified in and through us.
In Christ's name we pray. Amen. One thing, the altars, the rocks that you set up, the things that God's done in your life, be it this week, be it this month, be it this year, they set those up so they wouldn't forget. I too often forget what God has done in my life, and I need to rehearse. I need to make practice the art of remembering. And that's why they would set up these altars. So if you need to take a rock with you to remember, do it. And allow Christ to be magnified in and through your lives. You're dismissed. We'll see you next week. And oh, Christ be magnified.